So yin, yang, the essence of Chinese religion. That's the talk for today. So I want to begin today with an exercise. I want you to clear your mind of any labels, any preconceptions. I want you to simply ponder the picture in front of you. Look at it. Try to enter into it. Take your time. What do you see? Don't read any meaning into it yet. Just what do you see? And I'll give you a few seconds of silence before I begin again. So we see a circle. No beginning, no end. Dark and light. Interlocking swirls. There's a dark seed in the light and a light seed in the dark. And notice that it's not just cut straight in half with a straight line, but there's a curved line that separates the two halves. From the 4th century BCE, so that's 2,400 years ago, for ancient Chinese philosophy, this picture symbolized all reality, the entire universe. It symbolized being itself, all that there was, is, and ever will be. The universe without beginning, without end. So how did they think about this? Think of it not as static, but as pulsating, as if you can see it, hear it. Think of it as breathing. The dark, yin, the light, yang, two equal energies, two equal forces. And don't make any value judgments about the dark being evil and the light being good, or the light being superior to the dark. No, it is not a symbol of good and evil. We know from developmental psychologists that on the one hand, we have dualistic minds. Yet on the other hand, transcending dualistic thinking, finding their complementarity, is the path to wholeness. So although they appear to oppose each other, contrast with each other, they're actually in harmony with each other. They need each other for their lives. They are interdependent. Light and dark are equally important and equally healthy and unhealthy. Unlike the dualism of good and evil, neither can exist without the other. The proper balance is health. They interpenetrate each other, the S curve and the two smaller seeds. The two sides push into each other. Each side yields to the other. In every darkness, there is light, and every light carries darkness within it. There is never one without the other. Everyone, every person, every psyche, every heart carries within themselves light energy and dark energy. Already in the East, 2,500 years ago, what modern psychology has discovered, the Eastern religious and philosophical traditions already understood. And here's the point. We normally focus on both sides, the light and the dark. But the line that is the S curve in Chinese philosophy, that's what's called the Tao, the way. We live our lives along the S curve. Think about that. Your health, your work, your family life, your leisure life, your friendships, the way you vote, your value systems. We live our lives along the S. And the S is the relationship, healthy or not, between the two. Is there balance? Is there harmony between the two? Are they out of balance? Sometimes the S is wide and thick and impermeable, so the two sides never the twain shall meet. Other times it's narrow, even permeable, where one seeps into the other. It's open, empty. How's your S curve? When the S sometimes engulfs more of the light, the dark taking up more space, and other times the S engulfs more of the dark, the light taking up more space. The window into your psyche, into your mental, emotional, and physical health. Indeed, in Chinese philosophy, the health of a society is to be found along the Tao. Your life is lived along the S curve. And again, the proper balance between the two results in harmony in your life, wellness, and unity within diversity in a society. An imbalance creates illness in the individual, psychic illness as well as physical illness, and disorder within the society. I'm going to ask, and again, if everyone could mute themselves, please. We experience the relationship between yin and yang as qi, vital energy. Yin and yang as qi together was the energy of the singularity at the Big Bang. Let's call that macro qi. Qi is the energy that beats your heart and pulses within your veins. Let's call that micro qi. And qi is the energy you experience between you and other people within the society. We'll call that meso qi. By the way, those are Spath terms, not Chinese philosophical terms. Body, mind, nature, humanity, human beings with each other, and the forces within yourself. All these are governed by qi. Yin and yang are the dynamic qi of the universe. It flows within nature and within the human society. You see up above the brain in the yang and the heart within the yin. A little history. The two words first appear around the 9th century BCE in the Book of Songs, a book of poetry. They're used in two different ways: viewing the side of a mountain and viewing the banks of a river. Yang describes the sunny side of the bare mountain and the hard bank of the river flooded by sunlight. Yin describes the shady side of the mountain and the shaded, moist bank of the river, fertile, covered by trees. But it's the same mountain on both sides and the same riverbank. The yin-yang symbol known as Taiji is first seen around the 4th century BCE. Both are essential parts of one's vision. They're part of each other. As the I Ching puts it, one moment yang, then the next yin. This is the Tao. The early myths that come from the 4th century BCE, 2,400 years ago, tell the story that the one primordial breath, the Wan Qi, split into two breaths. The one, the light spiritual yang breath, which created heaven, the weightier yin breath, which formed the earth. And their relations over eons, in the myths, their sexual relations over eons produced the 10,000 beings, Chinese for all things in the universe, some of which were the world's first gods, like the Greek and Roman gods, and one of whom was Pangu, the first human being. But it all started with breath. One final note, which will help us in the next couple of classes. Confucianism emphasizes yang energy, while Taoism emphasizes yin energy, both of whom emphasize the middle path. Confucius preaches modesty, self-control, one's position in the family and society, and rules that govern your behavior. The main theme in his Analects and other writings is that of Chung-yung, the doctrine of the mean, the avoidance of extremes. Taoist writings, including the Tao Te Ching and the Chuang Tzu. By the way, the Tao Te Ching is my favorite scripture in the world. We'll talk about that in 3 weeks. Taoist writings, including the Tao Te Ching and Chuang Tzu, urge us to live our lives in alignment with the Tao, the rhythms of nature, which gives all life its order and meaning. In this way, too, they live a life of self-restraint and balance. But they are not viewed as two separate, distinct religions like we do in the West. Now, catch this. This is important. They're not viewed as two separate religions or philosophies. For example, in the West, it would be difficult to be a Christian Muslim or a Jewish Hindu. Like everything else in the West, we think dualistically. In China, we'll learn that for moral education, you might look to Confucianism. If you're ill, you might check with a Taoist priest. When contemplating your death, you ponder the Buddha's 4 noble truths. And in your daily piety, you might keep popular totems around the house. They all intersect, they interdepend, they overlap. They all complement each other. And that's different. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of time to look through these. Chinese philosophy and religion, then, are prime examples of yang and yin. In traditional Chinese political, social, and personal life, Confucianism, yang, and Taoism, yin, complement each other. And in their dynamic mutuality, one lives in balance and harmony. In Chinese philosophy, well, you see the two complementary energies. See, as you read down each column, see if you can discern a common theme in each one. Again, these are complementary forces. Both are needed for a healthy organism, and they move in and out of each other. They interbe, to use Thich Nhat Hanh's word, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk. They inter-are, they interbe. Each one is in the other. So yang foods generate hot energy in the body, which include red meat, ginger, pepper, and garlic, and others. Yin foods generate cold energy in the body, foods like watermelon and most green vegetables, gourd and crab. In yoga, yang yoga works on the strength of the muscles and the stamina and flexibility. In yin yoga, Poses are passively held for longer to strengthen the internal connective tissues and joints in the body. In the martial arts, you have the more offense-oriented yang arts like karate, which means strike with an empty hand. Notice it's not an open hand, but an empty hand. You're not holding anything, no weapon. Kendo, the way of the sword. By the way, whenever you see a do, that's just the English version of the Tao. So that means the way of the sword. Taekwondo, Tai means kick. Quan means a punch with the fist. In Do, the way of punching and kicking. So the Yang arts rely on blows. The more defensive Yin arts that use the force and power of the opponent against them, like Jiu-Jitsu, the art of yielding. Aikido, I meaning harmony, Ki meaning spirit, the way of the harmonious spirit. Or Judo, the way of gentleness. And in politics and social life. In politics and social life, if the government focuses too much on order, then you have a totalitarian state that doesn't allow for individual freedoms. But the other extreme leads to anarchy and a lack of concern for the common good. How do you find the balance? The example that the Chinese themselves traditionally used, just as the yang sun gives way to the yin moon, only to give way to the yang sun again, and the cycle goes on and on. Yang at full noon, full yin at midnight. Think of that as your life. The healthiest position for a human being, for society, is the way of harmony, the proper balance between the two. The waxing and waning, shadow in light and light in the shadow. That's the essence of Chinese religion. And if we want to translate that into the West, one of my real mentors theologically is Paul Tillich. And in one of his autobiographies, this German theologian who had to flee Germany, he was the first German professor removed from his position by the Nazis, and he fled to the United States. He describes his life as on the boundary between the mystical temperament inherited from his mother and the authoritarian temperament from his father. Between city and country, grew up in the country, but lived most of his life in the city. Theology and philosophy, Lutheranism and socialism, church and society, and others. This is why I've moved from traditional theological language for myself. I've moved from theological language of salvation to the psychological language of, well, Tillich says, the courage to be. Or we might think of wholeness, the embrace of ambiguity and paradox, or integration, the integration in a creative unity, two or more contradictory energies, forces, ideas. The goal is to bring together in a powerful force the same creative energy that gave rise to the universe in the beginning. But now in ourselves, through reflection and action, mind, body, and spirit in harmony, that same cosmic chi now channeled in and through us. The Chuangzi puts it like this: when the two have successful intercourse and achieve harmony, all things are born. So, how would you describe your life on the boundary? as the harmony between which darkness and which light, between which two opposing forces? How would you describe your life? In balance or out of balance? How would you describe your life lived along the S, along the Tao? So that's what I have to offer this morning. Good morning to Muriel and Emmy and Pat and Lee and Mary Flick and Cammie and Karen Hyman and Steve. And I think I've said good morning to everyone else. So that's what I had to say this morning. So let's open it up for your comments or questions. Linda, do you want to add anything before we get started?
I would just tell you that you all on the screen are being joined by 10 more people here in the classroom. So I would just ask in the chapel, I need to say, anybody in the chapel who has questions, I think you're going to need to ask them at great volume so that it'll come through the computer to everyone at home.
Yeah, Linda, yeah, and thank you, Linda. And why don't you, if somebody has a question there, rather than them shouting, why don't you just interject at some point and say, Michael, so-and-so has a question, and then we'll be able to listen to them too, okay?
Okay.
Thank you. All right, gang. Good morning to y'all. Where would you like to jump in? Yeah, Muriel, please. Muriel, you're muted right now.
Having not really known anything about this, it's difficult to move from right and wrong, good and evil. I mean, it's just, it's hard to even transfer my thinking to what you're saying.
And yet, Muriel, knowing you the way I do, you live that way. I mean, your mind may default to that, but somehow in your life you live a way that moves in and out of both yang and yin, I would say. With extreme grace, I would add. Thank you for that, though. No, I mean, it's a default, right? In the West, in fact, I would even suggest it's a human characteristic, and yet there's a culture in the East, right? In the Eastern traditions that from early on, we learn. It's not only default for human beings, but we reinforce it in the West. It doesn't need to be reinforced. That's the point, right? That's the point. Patty, please. Patty, you're muted as well.
And when Patty's finished, Trevor has a question from him.
Okay. This is really well done, Michael. I want to say that you are not you're a master teacher, but the visuals and what you are saying, this is just a wonderful Sunday morning experience, let me tell you. But here's my particular thought. I was looking at that one visual you had that had all the yin yangs in a circle with it, like nature and the opposites written in them, and you had human on one side and nature on the other side. And I'm wondering, what would a dolphin put there? Would they put dolphins and nature on the other side? I was just thinking, that some other entity, would they divide that up differently? Some other thinking entity.
Wow. And I'll be right with you, Trevor. Thank you for that, Patty. One of the things that we're learning now, much too late for me, I think, but in my in these later years for me, that is changing. It's really changing the way I look at things, and that's the beauty of Eastern thinking, by the way, and it's been helpful for me. When we think of Earth, so we're the stewards of the earth, right? That's what Genesis tells us, and that's what we think in the West. There's the earth, and then there's humanity, or there's creation, and there's human beings. But Patty, you're reminding us, we are the earth. We're part of the natural world. Like evolutionary psychologists are beginning to teach us, we're the creation now aware of itself. You know, in this stage of evolution, was it 14 billion years of evolution or something? We are now at a point where we are nature, but now come aware of ourself, of itself. And so what does that mean? That we are the earth, that we are the creation, that we are nature. And so St. Francis of Assisi maybe is the best known example, right? Brother sun, sister moon, brother fire, sister water, right? I mean, so we are the creation. That insight should radically transform our view of environmental justice, for example. Anyway, Trevor, please. Thank you, Patty.
With all this talk of different dualities of yin and yang, where would that leave a maker, creator of all this duality of yin and yang, and its role that it plays in all of that?
Well, you know, that's an excellent question.
I'm on. Sit down.
Thanks, Trevor. I'm getting a lot of feedback here. I'm gonna. That's an excellent question, and you raise a complicated question. So I'll answer it with a statement and then a question back for the rest of you. In the East, in Eastern traditions, there is no creator, right? The universe is taken as it is. So the creation stories are similar in the East as they are in Greek and Roman, mythology, Greek and Roman religion, right? Questions about a creator are kind of irrelevant. I mean, we observe things as they are, and then we find our insight from our analysis and observations of the way things are. The question is I'm looking around the screen, and I'm assuming at Plymouth Church, so we have Christians here of various progressive Christians, moderate Christians, and somewhere in between. We also have humanists on the screen and others. How would you translate this idea of yin and yang into your own value system and worldview and religious beliefs? That's the question, right? That's the question. So Trevor, thank you. You asked a multi-layered question.
Michael, there's an awful lot of feedback, and I think it's from the Plymouth Chapel sound. If they could mute that.
If you mute, can you hear me, Linda? If you mute, okay, good. Thanks, Pam. Who else? Yeah, Cammie, please.
Good morning.
Hi.
I tuned in a couple minutes late, but right away I was really struck by one of the first things I heard you say, which was life is lived along the S-curve. And I'm finding that just so useful, because right now I'm actually home isolated with COVID, having had to cancel a silent retreat I had scheduled for myself this coming week, to sit there and think about what am I doing with my life. As I just graduated with my degree.
I know. I was going to acknowledge that. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. At age 54, finally getting my undergrad done. My youngest child will graduate from high school in May. And I'm coming out of motherhood, but I'm also coming out of this very cerebral mode of learning and doing, and I'm really at this crossroads, like, what am I going to do for myself for the next 30 years? Am I going to get to work and work harder? Am I going to take a rest and go play? Am I going to accomplish, or am I going to just be? Am I going to, which side of the S curve? Or how do I navigate this ebb and the flow, the doing and the resting, the creating and the just all of the options available to me. And I'm finding this having a model to describe what's going on in here, a really useful and empowering thing. I feel like that, I get it. I get that it's not one or the other, but it's this ebb and flow. And the women's work that I've been involved with for the last 20 years, we do a lot of work with archetypal energies. And it's always about not right or wrong, this or that, but it's like bringing out more warrior or less warrior, more lever energy or less lever energies to keep the archetypes in balance. So I feel like I've got some comfort with the way the line does this, and it, moves from left to right and in and out. So I'm really loving what you presented this morning.
Well, thank you. You may have come in right after the slide where I had 4 quotes from Jung. This is this is Chinese philosophy is, nobody else would say this, but it's almost pre-Jungian, it's pre-Jung. I mean, Jung has his heart and mind embedded in the East, right? As he looks at religion. And so it doesn't surprise me that your work with archetypes prepared you for this today. Yes, it's the permeability, right, of each side with the other, where there's strength. It's not just health, but it's strength. And so as you navigate this, Cammie, your spiritual work, it'll be part of your spiritual work, and that's good. And we're with you now as you're isolating yourself. Oh my gosh. But also we are loving the fact that you have your degree now.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Stay tuned for the next stage.
There you go. Who else?
I would just add, from where I am today, I feel as if I'm as well balanced along that line as I've ever been. I have tranquility and a degree of comfort with where I am and what I'm doing, and what is all, all the challenges, all the everything out there that I see as being exciting. I just feel I'm in a very good place.
Well, Jerry, thank you for that. You've shared this publicly, so I don't think I'm sharing anything out of school, but you're a model for many of us because you have faced depression in your life.
Yep.
And somehow, I don't want to trivialize it, but to call that a life out of balance, where the darkness in just engulfs you.
Yes.
But now, and now your autobiographical reflections, what, the 36?
36, yes.
And then now facing, the cancer.
Yes.
And all the treatments there, and just all what that means, just in terms of your physical strength and your emotional strength and all the rest. For you to say that is really a testimony, not only to the truth of what we're talking about today, but to your own just journey. So thank you for sharing that.
Michael.
Yes, Emmy.
I love this morning. It was wonderful. My book, Tao Te Ching, I love it. I picked this up about 12 years ago at a bookstore, and I recommend you all buy one. There's several different interpretations of it, but it's such a wonderful spiritual philosophy, definitely from the East. And my friend and mentor, Margaret Warner, who died in 2000, she always told me that Christianity came from the spirituality of the East. And I do believe a lot of that philosophy is that. So I've always been drawn to this as much as the teachings of Jesus. And, but if I go to wisdom, I pick this up. I always leave it out so I can go to it. So I loved everything you said this morning, Michael. It's very revealing and very affirming. And I would like to be like Jerry and get in the center of that S. I'm not sure I'm there yet, but I try to work at it every day. So thank you for this morning.
Thanks, Emmy, so much. By the way, give Pat our love. I know he's still recovering, so give him our love. As I mentioned during the talk, the Tao Te Ching is my favorite scripture as a whole. Now, of course, I love Romans 8 and Revelation 12 and Ephesians 6 and Genesis 1 and 2 and, some of the Psalms. But the Tao Te Ching, the 6th century BCE, a compilation. I mean, we'll talk more about this in 3 weeks on the 30th. We'll talk about Taoism then. In 2 weeks, we'll be talking about Confucianism. But the Tao Te Ching, wonderful. Who else? Anybody else from Plymouth? In Plymouth Chapel? Oh, Jan, please jump on in.
Well, I have been reading recently journals by people who are very, very much in touch with nature and with the environment. And I see a lot in this. One of the things that I pulled from it was why being out in nature is so helpful to me as I travel the curve or try to. They're doing the heart and the brain, they're doing the shade and the sun, they're doing the roots and the leaves, the animal life, the animal kingdom that we're related to. So I found that connection real helpful for me.
Well, your work out in nature with Eagle Marsh, right? So you are especially in touch with these energies. And I think one of the things that we have to learn, we've been so in the West about our heads, or about technological progress, or about this. I'm a city boy, South St. Louis. So, cobblestone streets and pavement and all the rest, is my background. And so one of the things that I need to learn and relearn again is connection with the natural world, because it's not just the obvious things, but it has to do with the inner psyche as well, right? I mean, getting your hands in dirt, right? I mean, there's something powerful about that. And the rhythms and energies of the animal world and the plant world and all the rest. I mean, there's something transformative about that. Thank you, Jan. Who else? Anybody in the chapel? Please.
There. Hi, thanks. Had to have some help.
Yes, good to see you.
Yeah, good. Hey, thanks. No, I don't really have a comment. I just need to hear a repeat. You said the theological term salvation, and then you went with the psychological term. Could you repeat that phrase again?
Sure. I said I've moved away from the traditional theological language about salvation. To me, that really tends to be more, we're dualistic. So, we're sinful human beings that need to be saved. And I'm moving more toward psychological language. So Paul Tillich uses the term the courage to be, or the courage to accept your own acceptance, or the word wellness or wholeness or integration. I think those communicate more powerfully in our age.
Mhm.
And so they communicate more powerfully to me, and they say, I think, more clearly what I want to say, but also just in a practical terms. Today, as we're sitting here, 30% of Americans now identify themselves as not connected to any religious tradition. They're the so-called nuns, right? N-O-N-E-S, nuns. And I think, and that's growing. 5 years ago, it was 21%, just 5 years ago. So according to the Pew polls, 21% to 30%. And I don't blame the nuns, I blame the churches. And by the way, I blame not only fundamentalist churches on, the religious right, I blame progressive churches. We're not speaking the language of the Gen X, Gen Y, the Zennials, as they're called, the Gen Z. How many of our kids are involved with church, are not involved with church, or turned off by church, or just or even worse, find church irrelevant? So how can we speak the language of deep meaning to our kids and our kids' kids? It's not about getting people to come to church. It's about people living lives of deep meaning, connecting to the ultimate source of life. So I guess that's where I am. That's where I'm moving more and more, trying to talk about deep meaning, and in language matters, right? In language that connects.
Great, thank you.
And by the way, that's just Mike. I mean, you all might have a different view of that, but
Michael, I would just ask a question that may be trivial, but teaming off of what she's just asked. Should mainline churches, Christian churches, I'll say, pray the Lord's Prayer every Sunday? I'm beginning to find myself really struggling with the language in Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our sins. Forgive us our debts. Forgive us our trespasses. Forgive us our brokenness. Forgive us our unwillingness to surrender to a higher power. I don't like on earth as it is in heaven. So I don't know where that comes in a conversation about Tao, but I throw it out there.
Well, let me answer it a number of ways. You'll be surprised to hear from me that I've never had. Well, Patty, you want to jump in here, and then I'll jump in.
Oh, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's good, because I do relate pretty well to the Lord's Prayer, except that line irks me also, that forgive us our sins. When I first came to Plymouth, my first full-time experience being back in a Christian church after spending most of my previous 20 years just as a theosophist and looking at Eastern religions and wisdom traditions, I discovered that the minister liked to use the phrase, forgive us our debts, which was very comfortable, because I'd been studying about karmic debts, for 20 years. You create your own, evil, bad situations, and then you have to pay the karmic debt. And so that was very comfortable to me. But then when 10 years later, got moved back into sins, it was like putting on a shoe that was too small. I just,
Well, thanks, Patty. Yeah, I mean, let me answer this. Thanks for that. That's helpful. Let me answer it this way. And this really begs a much, much larger conversation. I'll go from the macro to the micro here. You'd be surprised to hear I've never had a problem confessing the church's creeds or praying the Lord's Prayer, because I interpret them metaphorically and mythologically rather than literally. So I can make the case. Now I'm not proposing that. I'm not saying that we should, because that can reinforce maybe some things in the popular mind that I mean, not everybody interprets things that way, but for me personally, I've never had any problems doing that. In terms of sins, I mean, I get it. I mean, when in the church I grew up with, I, a poor, miserable sinner, Catholics grew up with mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, I'm guilty. So I get that. Really, the word sin just means, you miss the target, and like a bow and arrow, you're missing the mark. And, but I certainly understand that for the vast majority of people, this kind of dogmatic language and this guilt language really doesn't resonate anymore. So, it'd be worth having a larger conversation. The last thing I'll say, though, is that we can find this in the Christian faith. For example, I mean, see, most doctrines we can squeeze in, most Christian doctrines we can understand in terms of this yin yang. I'll give you one prime example. The doctrine that Jesus is both 100% divine and 100% human. The fancy term in the 4th century is called the hypostatic union. All that means is that this isn't about biology. Somehow that Jesus had God's sperm, and all of a sudden made him God. I mean, it turned out to be that way in the Western church, but really in the 4th century, when they were talking about this, it meant that that whatever Jesus was in terms of his relationship, how he understood his relationship with the divine, there was an indwelling of the divine with the human and the human with the divine. And by the way, I'll say one last thing so there's this yin yang element in Christ's own nature, the way the church defined it. And I'll say this as well. Whatever people say about Jesus, whatever people say about God, they're really saying about themselves. Doctrines are not doctrines about God, about Christ. They're really anthropological. We're really saying something about how we understand our own nature. Theology is really at root anthropology. That's the heart of what we want to say here. So when I say something about the indwelling of the divine and human in the two natures of Jesus, what I'm really saying something is about myself, spirit and matter, mind and body, heaven and earth inside of me, something that's eternal and something that's mortal inside of me. So when all these things that we're saying about Christ, we're really saying about ourselves. All theology is anthropology at root. And that's this yin and yang, I think. That's the yin and yang. They interbe. So the question, and as Muriel pointed out at the very, very beginning, how do we in the West shift this kind of thinking, And as has been pointed out a couple times here too, Jan's not on here anymore, but our connection with the natural world is probably the place where where we meet this most clearly, or what that helps, that can help us. Silence, meditation, our connection with the natural world, in whatever way we can do that, that helps us make that shift from the Western mindset into a more holistic view and healthier view. I'm aware of the time, gang. I can stay on for another few minutes, but I'm also aware that some of you may have to go. You know, the other place where a number of us do this, in the broadest possible understanding, the arts. So anything from painting to sculpting to pottery to quilting to journaling to drawing to poetry to writing, as Jerry does. Any kind of creative work breaks us free from our Western left brain mindsets and opens us up to a bigger reality. And I mentioned various things because I was thinking of Pam with quilting, Mary Flick with journaling, Emmy with her pottery and painting, and some of the rest, Jerry with his writing, some of the rest of you. So I was thinking of some of you as I mentioned those things. Jan Everard with her yoga work, anything that's creative, that makes use of the imagination, the creative spirit. That gets us out of our left brain thinking as well and makes us more holistic and healthy. Anybody else want to close it up for today? Yes, Linda.
Well, I would just close by saying thank you from all of us to you, Michael. And a reminder again that we will not have class next Sunday. The SPACs need to be out of state, but we'll be back for the next 2 Sundays, and I will make arrangements that we can also do this via Zoom then. So none of you will miss a thing. And I'm so glad all of you folks from the outside world tuned in as well. So thank you.
In 2 weeks. Thank you, Linda. In 2 weeks, we'll do Confucianism and the virtues, Confucius and his virtues. And then in 3 weeks, we'll do, on the 30th, we'll do the way of the Tao. And so anyway, and Taoism. Thanks, everyone, for joining us this morning. Blessings to you all.